Okay, so this is all I need in my Pojo class. This is finished. So now I have my Hibernate.configuration file. I have my Pojo class created. I don't need the .properties file, so I close it. Now I have created the two things. Now there are two more things remaining which I need to create. One is a mapping file where I'll map these variables to the table which I used in the columns in the database. Now the other thing I need to write is there are four things you need to write when you when you use the Hibernate application. First is the two configuration files, two XML files, you may say two XML files, and one Pojo class, and one the class where you write the logic. That is where you're performing the insertion. So now we have to map this to our database. So let's write the next XML file. Remember, in Hibernate framework we use two XML files. We are done with the configuration file where we actually configured the connection to connect to our database. Now let's write the mapping file, the other XML file, where we'll map these variables to the column names in the database table and this class to the table name in the database. So next, create new other XML file. Next, now as the configuration file had some naming convention that it was configuration file must have .cfg.xml extension. Similarly, the mapping file, the Hibernate mapping file, the XML file also have a specific naming extension. That is, it must have .hbm, which stands for Hibernate mapping .xml extension. This extension is compulsory. The name we can have before it can be anything. So for now let's use employee emp. I can use anything. I'm simply using emp. emp.hbm.xml is my mapping file name. This extension is compulsory. This can be anything. Now finish it. Now this name I have to update in my configuration file where I left a blank. I told that when I'll write the mapping file I'll update it here. So this is going to be emp.hbm.xml. This is done. Now let's write our mapping file. Now, like the configuration file, I first wrote the DTD, document type declaration, for the configuration file. Similarly, I need to write the document type declaration for my Hibernate mapping file. Now for that, let's minimize this and open our Hibernate distribution 3.5.6 final version. Go to the project and project core source main resources organization Hibernate, and the other, last time we used the configuration DTD, now we have to use the mapping DTD. So the mapping DTD, we have to copy this DTD, copy it and paste it in our EMP. Right now I'm going to arrange it in one line. And arrange this in one line. See, there's a space. Alright, this is the DTD part is done. So let's close this. Now write the DTD in a similar fashion how we wrote our mapping configuration file. Control Z, control space. The first name gonna be the document type name which we used. So control space Hibernate mapping, enter. Now class. Now what we are doing in our mapping file, we are mapping this class, the employee.java class, to the table. So obviously class means the class name, the class which we are going to map. This is a class which we are going to map and it has the name employee. So this class we are going to map to the database table. So class it has few attributes. Now space, control space, we have name. This is going to be the name of the class. Now my name of the class is employee.java, so I'm going to type employee, and then I have table. Now simple enough, you have the class name and you have the table you want to map it with. Table refers to the table, this table, employee table with a capital EMP. Anyhow, this is case insensitive. I mean the Oracle SQL version is case insensitive, but for showing the distinction between what is the database object and what's the class object, I'll write it in capitals, employee. So this is a table in our database in my user type, and this is the class, and I'm mapping them both. Now class is done. Inside the class, now I have to map these variables. How shall I do that? Since ID is the private, ID variable is the primary key in that table, so I'm going to declare it as ID, which is generally declared for the primary key. So I have ID, then again I have name, this name refers to the variable name in my class, that's ID with small ind. Alright, then there's gonna be column name. This column name refers to the column in my table, that is capital ID. Alright, so that is capital ID. Now I'm declaring this as ID because this ID means its primary key, it has unique value. So ID, and then I have something called type. So I have something called type. Now this type refers to neither this type, neither this type. It refers to something known as the Hibernate type. Now Hibernate configuration has some specific types so that we can map between the Java type available and we can map between the SQL type number. For example, if we have int here and number here, I have to use a Hibernate type called as integer with the small I. It's like in Hibernate types, if you have a capital string, there's a string with small s. If you have an integer in Java with this I, in Hibernate type is gonna be integer with a small I. I will probably provide the list of Hibernate types available in the document later. For now, let's say this is the integer type. There are a list of available Hibernate types, and I'll keep the list in my blog soon enough. Now this is the integer type. Finished. Now I have to use something called generator class assigned. That means I'm going to assign them individually rather than, because since it's a primary key. For example, take an example of a receipt which cashier prints every time you buy something. The receipt number is generally not assigned, it's self-generated, right? He don't type the receipt number, add one number next time. It's always self-generated receipt number. So generator class is actually a method how you do that self-generation of primary key. But for now, let's say we use it assigned, and we'll see more about this in later. Alright, so that's the generator class, and our ID column is done. That was a primary column, it's done. Primary variable name ID is mapped to the column ID, and the class is mapped accordingly. Now the other variables. For other variables, I use property. I don't need to use ID. Property name is, see the property name, next property name is name, NAME, and the property column is ename. Sorry, I'm alright. It's a good example. You see, it can have different names. I can use capitals so that you know this is from the database. Ename. Alright, so, and the type, obviously. Type is going to be, we have string type with a small s. Now this is done. Now remaining objects, new Control Z. I don't know what I did. Alright, property, next name. What's my property name? The next one, it's mobile with long type. So mobile with column. Column is gonna be this column, mobile. It's same name. Now the type is going to be the Hibernate type, so that Hibernate can map it. Type is long. Alright, type is long. And then what's remaining? The last one, I think. Yeah, that's email. Let's go with email. Property, email. Just check the spelling. It's email with email, and the column is email. This should be this. Alright, email, and the type is string. Alright, this is finished. Now I have my class all perfectly mapped with my database. So this is over. Just check it out once more. I have class name, and in the class I'm closing the class here, opening here, and in between that I have my columns, my variables mapped to the columns, and they have the type assigned and the column and the name. Alright, finished. Save this. Now what do we need? We need to run the program, and we need to write the main logic. So let's create a new class now. New, the last thing, the fourth thing. Class insert employee. This is some name, and it's going to have the void main method since it will be running. So public class insert employee, public static void main string arguments. Now before running, we are using the Hibernate distribution 3.5.6 final version. So obviously we have to use the jars provided by it, like we have to use this 3 Hibernate testing, and we have to use required jars, and we have to use the optional we don't need to use the optional jars. We need to use this, and you need to use the JDBC jar available from your database. For example, in my database I use this OJDBC14_G. Where is it available? Go to my computer, see, I have Oracle XC application, Oracle product 10.2.0 and server, and you have something called JDBC here, and in the library you have the jars which are used to connect to the database. So you have to use this jar, and if you are using some other server, MySQL, and you will have similar structure there, and in the JDBC folder on that database you'll have the jar. The jars are provided by the database vendor themselves so that we can connect our Java program to the database. So you have to use this jar. So what I did was, instead of every time for going in this distribution folder and project and not project, sorry, and adding them